Hey everyone, Chat Sematary is back, as is Tim Mathews. I'm your host, Deanna Chapman, and before we dive into today's episode, I quickly want to thank two of our recent Patreon supporters, Jesse Lee Freeman and Andy Howard. I also apologize that it took me so long to get those thank yous out to both of you, and if anyone else is interested in supporting this show and my other show, Welcome to Geekdom, there's a link in the show notes where you can support on Patreon as well. Tim, today we're talking all about Dreamcatcher, the movie, which you and I discussed the book not too long ago. How are you doing today, and are you ready for this?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's good to be back in the Dreamcatcher world. It's so riveting, and I love it.
Is it? Is it good?
I guess we'll get to that.
So to quickly recap, in case anyone didn't listen to our book episode, you and I were both very iffy on the book, to say the least, because I have this thing where I haven't liked King's alien type of stories as much. And when you watch this movie, you're like, oh, they went heavy on the alien stuff. And I think what was disappointing about both the book and the movie was just how well the story seemed to start off, and then it totally shifts in sort of tone and direction for the second half.
Yeah. No, that was for like it. Definitely the alien stuff is in the movie is not necessarily at all how I pictured it reading the book. And I don't know if that's because the book and the movie, took different approaches on it, or I was just tuning in and out of the book. I'm not sure. But yeah, no, I mean, just like the book, the movie also has this feeling of two completely different movies, two completely different stories meshed into one that don't necessarily fit.
And it's more noticeable in the movie, obviously, because you have that visual element to it.
I completely agree. I mean, I was sitting there and watching the scenes where Jonesy comes in and he realizes that his friend's dead, and then he's blocking the door. I was not expecting the at first, that whole thing, I'm like, oh, this is kind of like decently well done. It's this like creature feature. The CGI of the creature actually looked pretty good and everything. And then when it like kind of did this morph and became the gray aliens, it was a significant change. I felt like in style and tone from what we had just seen maybe like 20 seconds ago.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh wow, okay, we're going here. And the CGI was significantly worse than the the creepy bitey creature, or the shit weasels, if you will. I believe they were referred to in the book. I don't think there was one thing I feel like the movie did better was they didn't hammer home on some of Stephen King's weirder terminology for his creatures that he used very heavily in the book.
Yeah, they were almost strictly just aliens in this. And
yeah,
what I thought was disappointing, though, about this adaptation is the fact that this cast and crew is so recognizable. You have Lawrence Kasdan directing this, as well as writing it with William Goldman. You have Morgan Freeman, Thomas Jane, Jason Lee, Damian Lewis, Timothy Oliphant, Tom Sizemore, even Donnie Wahlberg is in this. And you just wonder why this wasn't better.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the one thing that has always stuck out to this movie is, and you listed it right there. And even as I was watching the movie, and I had seen this before, and actually, the more I thought about it, I'm like 95% sure I saw this in theaters. And don't remember much of my experience seeing it in theaters, except kind of being utterly confused. And as I'm sitting watching it for getting ready for this, as those opening credits are going, it was just like one name after another. And I was just like, no. I was like, is how is this person in this? How is it? And then it really hit me because I had already looked it up, ahead of the time when we had talked about the book. So I was re-familiar with who was in the cast, and I knew Lawrence Kasdan was the director and everything. But then even the composer, and I'm blanking on his name right now, but it was just like, oh, that's a great composer. Like it was yet another. But what really got me was when William Goldman's name popped up, and I was just like, are you serious? I was like, the guy who wrote the Princess Bride, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, All the President's Men. Like I could go on, and I was just like, you take him and the man who gave us Empire Strikes Back and so much more, and this movie's just mind-boggling because it should, in all essence, it should be a slam dunk. Everyone who signed on to this movie, I assume, read the script. Like, it's just, it's wild.
I think the composer was James Newton Howard.
Yeah, that's what it was. And it's like, I really like his stuff. And yeah, it's just everyone involved. Like, I can't say it enough. Like, if you look at this movie on paper, you would think it's going to be one of the greatest movies of all time if you just put all those people together. And it's not.
Yeah, it's really amazing how many big names they were able to get in this, because Morgan Freeman has been a big name for such a long time. And I know some stuff has come out that he's made creepy, inappropriate comments towards women. And obviously, at this point, a lot of people knew him from being in the Shawshank Redemption, in particular with Stephen King adaptations. And then you have Thomas Jane, who will go on to appear in the Mist adaptation. I should say the movie adaptation, because there's one of those adaptations that is certainly not as good as the other. But you have these people who are either returning to the King universe in this movie or will wind up returning to it later. And even someone like Donnie Wahlberg, New Kids on the Block was huge right before this movie came out, pretty much. And, in the late 90s, they were pretty big, if I'm not mistaken. And, he's playing Duddits. So we don't see him until like 2/3 of the movie has gone by.
Yeah.
Mostly because we see the younger version of him, I should say.
Right. And I could be, way off base here, but I could have sworn there was more stuff with Duddits in the book than there was in the movie.
I thought there was too, but I'm wondering if maybe we just had more flashback moments in the book, and that's why we're both thinking we should have seen more of Duddits. But even when we do eventually see him, it's like they're telling him to stay in the car.
Yeah. It's interesting that it's, so much of what drives the story of this movie is, what brings all these guys together is, I can't stop thinking about Duddits. It's can't stop thinking about him. And then, we get the backstories, and we get the flashbacks. And then still, throughout the movie, it's almost like every 10 minutes, just like thinking about Duddits, and then he's just not there. And then, like you said, when he is there, he doesn't feel as forefront to the story as I feel like he should be, based on the weight of who he is to these characters and to the story, to Mr. Gray. It's and there's definitely there's things I do think are really well done in this movie, similar to the way that we had positive things to say about the book. I liked the flashback stuff. I wanted more of that. And I guess the stuff that I did like about the book was the Duddit stuff, which, some of the stuff with the Duddits, things that were in the book, there was an excessive use of like the R word, and I wasn't thrilled about that. I was really glad to see that take a huge backseat in the movie. And I understand it takes place in a different time, but still. But like the Duddit stuff, even the Mr. Gray stuff in the movie and in the book, I very much enjoyed. I thought visually that was really cool how they handled it with, recreating his like library and everything. And I think he does a really nice job going back and forth between Mr. Gray and himself. Like that stuff is cool. And then you throw in giant CGI gray aliens and then scenes of like the movie trying to be Independence Day with them attacking like the mothership and everything. And I'm just like, can we get back to the personal part of this story? Like, it's just, I honestly, I don't care about Morgan Freeman's character, like not one bit in this entire movie. I feel like that entire subplot could have just been taken out.
This story in particular works a lot better when you're not so focused on who is playing these characters, but how they're interacting with each other. The first half of the movie is pretty much, in this book that I have, Stephen King at the Movies, they describe it as an adult Stand By Me, basically. And then you get those Stand By Me aspects when we have the flashbacks and, the kids walk along the railroad track and they find a dead body, and it's very similar in that sense. And if he would have stuck with that instead of going where the story goes for the second half, I think that would have been a lot better. You could have still incorporated this weird stuff going on, but to have it be like this full-on alien invasion thing, it was just too much, I think. If they would have left it more mysterious with, the lost people who ended up at the cabin with them, or the hole in the wall, I think is what they called it. And you had that sort of mystery and these weird creatures like in the mist coming around, that would have played off better, I think, than the military coming in and them attacking this alien race and doing all of these other things that just took you so far from the main characters. You were kind of like, these needed to be two different stories.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The stuff with our main characters could be really captivating, and I enjoyed I'm not saying that all the dialogue with them, isn't necessarily clunky or stilted. Even the way it's acted, the way it's acted kind of feels like otherworldly. Like it feels like the characters in the movie are almost putting on a play. Like it feels like the characters in the movie are acting, if that makes sense. There's just something off about the entire thing. But at the same time, if it has that style, I can get behind that style. It may be weird or jarring at first, but I could get into that. And I did. And I enjoyed when I was just around those characters. And then even when you bring in like the creepy monster, that was more well done and better handled in the movie than it was in the book, because I didn't need all the excessive detail that Stephen King gave me for like 20 pages in the book. It may have been less than that, but it certainly felt for a long time. But in terms of the movie, I was like, okay, well, this is these friends that they came together. We're getting their backstory, and the movie's moving along with this mysterious, weird creature. I don't need necessarily, like you said, a huge explanation about, oh, this is an alien invasion. I could have just been fine with, this is a weird, bizarre creature, and, it's picking them off one by one, and somehow Duddits comes back into it. Like, if you take the military stuff out of it, like, you certainly have to put something back in to still pull all this together. The story with all the friends doesn't hold weight only on its own. But it's a much stronger story than I think the alien invasion. And I would have preferred focus on that and fleshing that out. I loved when we got that the one backstory when they first start to like use the powers, and they find the girl, and hashtag Pennywise lives, and it's, I would have preferred, like, let's lean into that, let's, I want more of that. It's like, I wanted more of them and a heck of a lot less of the military. It's every time that came about, I just started to tune out. I was like, I don't care anymore. And then we go back to the characters, and I'm like, okay, this is, especially when like it was the Mr. Gray stuff, and it's, when Thomas Jane like comes across him. I love when he's walking and he's realizes he's like, you're not Jonesy. And then he kind of like almost like Looney Tunes, like hides in the snow. Like, the movie definitely, it has its moments that work, almost because I feel like it plays like a really high budget bad movie on sci-fi.
It was a really high budget too. I think they made it for like $68 million, which is a lot, I should say, specifically for a Stephen King adaptation. I've seen ones that were made on like $5 million. So,
Yeah.
There's definitely a wide range of budgets when it comes to Stephen King adaptations. And this was towards the higher end, obviously, because of who they cast in it, but because of all the CGI they also had to do. And it really just felt like they took a big swing at this and missed. And I think a lot of it does have to do with the source material, because this is one of the King books that I don't hear a lot of people talking about. And I just discussed something similar with From a Buick 8. That's a story that has sort of this otherworldly aspect to it. There's a portal to a different world, and there's these monsters. And it's one that hasn't been adapted yet because it's so weird and difficult, because there isn't enough action to drive it. So I feel like they added more focus on the military aspects simply to have action to drive the story to its conclusion.
Yeah, I could definitely agree with that, because I'm not sure how they get to the conclusion or what Duddit's purpose is in the story when you take that out. I'm not sure what direction the story is necessarily heading in.
I wonder if they maybe could have used Duddits as the way to communicate with the aliens and either convince them to leave people alone or leave in general, because he obviously has a lot of power. And we see that he's brought along for a reason, because he's the reason all of these other guys are able to do what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. The conclusion could have and should have weighed a lot more on an intimate and personal level with Duddits. And I feel like it tries to do that with like him sacrificing himself and everything. But at the same time, the movie hasn't given me enough time with him and the rest of them to necessarily care that much. When Jonesy's, screaming that, he's going to die and everything, it's just like, I don't feel it, and I want to, and I should, but it was just kind of, instead I felt like, perfect, this is almost over.
I think it doesn't help either that some of the guys don't really seem likable when we're introduced to them as their adult selves.
Yeah, absolutely. One of them, it's, you have Timothy Oliphant, and it's one of the things that's interesting to me about the decision of his even his character's job. He's what, a car salesman? When you learn the power he has, and then, especially when we get the flashback and when he gets that power and they find a girl and save her with that, how is he not at least like a private eye? Like, I just feel like there could be so much more that you could have done with that character, and something that you could have given to me about, these kids, clearly they, together with Duddits, they saved somebody. I'd love to know what went wrong in their lives that caused them to not move in a special direction, with their lives, and do something more meaningful. And yeah, like you said, each person we're introduced to, and maybe in some instances we're not supposed to be thrilled with them, but it's like, look, I love Jason Lee. I think he's hilarious. And there's probably nobody else who could at least somewhat sell some of that atrocious dialogue that that he has to say.
Yeah.
It because of knowing him, and especially like him in like the Kevin Smith movies, it's almost like I just resigned to, as if I was watching Brody from those movies, and I'm like, yeah, he would say stupid things like that, like whatever. But I was just like, it made it so hard for me to even recognize, except for obviously the redhead, it made it hard for me to really focus on who's who in the flashback, because their adult selves are completely unrecognizable to any of their characteristics as children.
Yeah, you really feel like something happened and we have no context as to what it was. So then you're a little less invested in them as adults, I would say. You could tell they have this sort of banter going on still, because they do say that they meet up at the place once every year, I think it is. And you can tell that they still have their connection, because when one calls, they immediately know who's calling without having caller ID or even looking at the phone or anything. So that connection is still there, but there are a lot of times when they're together that you don't really feel that connection. And you would think that when the one was in trouble in the bathroom and Jonesy's out looking for the tape, Jonesy would have felt something or felt some sort of urgency to get back.
Yeah, exactly. It's because they have almost this like kind of like force power where, it's like you see in Star Wars, like when someone close to a character who, has the force, when one of them like dies or something, they feel that. And the way the movie introduces that power, I mean, it works at a distance, because like you said, Jonesy's calling Thomas Jane. I forget his character's name. Is it Pete? But he's calling Thomas Jane, and before he answers, he's just like, Jonesy, so it works at a distance. So you're completely correct. Like,
so real quick to break down the characters, since I keep getting them confused too. Thomas Jane is Henry, Jason Lee is Beaver, Damian Lewis is Jonesy, and Timothy Oliphant is Pete.
Yeah, so I was wrong. And yeah, it's just there's so many things throughout this movie that I feel like are pieces of a puzzle that if you put them together, you could get a good movie out of it. But the pieces aren't picked up. I feel like they're just shuffled around. You have these characters that you can tell are supposed to have a connection, but I agree with you. I don't feel that connection. As like I said, I feel like they're putting on a show. I don't feel like the chemistry is there, and I'm with you. I don't think it's really as much fault to the people involved in the film. I don't the actors, even look, I mean, I love William Goldman's writing, and it's like you got him and what is his name who wrote it and directed it?
Lawrence Kasdan.
Isn't his son James, maybe? I don't know.
I know there's more than one Kasdan.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
Yeah. But anyway, it's like you got the two of them. When I think about the book and the fact that we read it, so we know that material, I guess they did the best that they could to adapt what they're adapting. I'm just not so certain I understand why any of the people involved wanted to adapt this story. You have so many fantastic artists involved in this. And if you gave them one of Stephen King's stronger pieces of material, it could have been huge. It could have been awesome. I'd love to know, what was it about this story that at the time they were like, this is going to be the next big thing? Like, I would love to know. It's because I'm not necessarily familiar with what the reception was of the book back then. I mean, I know we go in waves of Stephen King where something of his is super successful, so then everyone starts buying the rights and wants to and wants to do them, and that's what we're in right now. And I would say it's been more successful recently than unsuccessful, but it definitely still varies, and it clearly varied back then. There's so much about this movie just confuses me. I just wanted it to be good.
Yeah, and obviously from a production standpoint, it looked good.
It did.
There were some really cool shots in this, and I think it was the story where things fell flat. And again, that's partially due to the source material, but I like it when adaptations take some risks. There are certain times when you don't need to, with things like The Green Mile. That was very, very close to the book from what I remember. In Shawshank, they changed a couple of details, and I think it just depends on what you think is going to work well on screen versus what worked well when you're reading a book, because Stephen King can get as detailed as he wants when describing something in a book, but that doesn't mean you can make it come to life on the big screen or the small screen. I mean, today that's a little different. There's a lot more capabilities when it comes to CGI, and even I would imagine practical effects look better these days too, but it really just felt like this had all of the potential and did not quite hit at the level everyone was hoping for. And I don't think it's a really bad movie, so to speak. I have seen Stephen King adaptations that are way worse than this, certainly. And, I ended up giving this a 2.5 out of 5.
I think I was roughly around the same. I think I gave it a 2, and part of that was I think I had considered giving it the half star, and then I was just angry of like who was involved, that like out of spite I was like, no, you had all these great people, you don't get this, you don't get a bonus star just for including them, you wasted them. But no, I'm right there with you. I enjoyed watching the movie definitely more than I enjoyed reading the book. Like you said, I thought it looked really cool. I really liked this like blown out film aesthetic that the cinematography had. It was very grainy, very rough. I thought that was really cool. I enjoy all the actors in it, and watching the movie, and I think I talked about this when we were talking about the book, that a book, I question whether a book can be like so bad it's good, because you spend so much time with a book. I think the audiobook of Dreamcatcher was like 22 hours, and that's a lot of Dreamcatcher. So, and obviously it's roughly the same reading. And with the movie, I mean, look, you give me 2 hours of things that are genuinely enjoyable, and things that got so ridiculous that I at least could sit and laugh at them. And I feel like that's so much easier in a movie. So when you had the stuff with like Morgan Freeman, and it's like he's I don't know what this part of the military is supposed to be, but whatever it is, I'm pretty sure you're still not allowed to just openly shoot like your soldiers. It was so over the top of them trying to showcase that Morgan Freeman's character had lost his mind. So it was like, when you got to those things, I didn't necessarily enjoy them, but like how I described it earlier, it was like I was watching a high budget kind of crappy movie that's pretty fun on the Sci-Fi Channel. There was no Crocosaurus or Mega Shark, but there could have been, and it frankly would have fit right into this movie with how bizarre and weird it was. It's because of like those aspects that it's like, when I had the character moments that I really enjoyed, when there was the Mr. Gray stuff, I was right in it. Whenever Mr. Gray was involved, that was the stuff I wanted more of, because I was like, he is really creepy as Mr. Gray.
Yeah. I love the memory warehouse too,
so
and just
cool.
the look of that, because when you think about how Jonesy's powers work and everything, something like the memory warehouse makes sense. And I do want to give them credit for making the bathroom scene look absolutely horrific.
Yeah.
Because when you're reading the book, it doesn't come across the same way. I swore when we were reading the book, I thought it was like an outhouse, not a bathroom in the cabin.
I'm right there with you. I thought it was I thought it was either an outhouse, or I even, because of how that was described, thought that the cabin was almost like an ice shack. You know, that it
Okay.
the whole thing was. I'm right there with you. Like it felt so much smaller and rougher.
But it was still nasty in the movie.
Oh, it was so gross, but it worked in a like body horror, John Carpenter The Thing kind of way. And it's Stephen King said for the book he wanted to do for the toilet what Jaws did for the water. I think that worked in the movie. It makes you second guess the toilet for sure. But it's that quick scene in the movie, because it was just like a sci-fi creature horror thing. I was on board with it. The way Stephen King goes about describing it in the book, I couldn't wait for that scene to be over, and I couldn't take the scene seriously because of the way he kept describing everything. But in the movie, I certainly laughed, but I laughed at things I think I was supposed to laugh at. Jason Lee did it with the door opens and, he falls off the toilet and everything, and they're freaking out. It's like, I'm laughing, but I'm laughing because of their reaction, especially his. And I feel like you're supposed to be grossed out and disgusted, which I was, but then also kind of laughing at their responses, and the tension of sitting there, and it's like he's sitting on the toilet and it's like, here's another thing. He clearly has this affliction or something with the toothpicks. Like he clearly has to have one like at all times, or at least like it's something that helps his stress. I was on the edge of my seat of like, he kept leaning forward and I knew, what's going to happen. And I kept waiting for this thing to just shoot out. But at the same time, I feel like I don't think the movie gave us anything to understand his addiction to the toothpick, unless I missed it. All of a sudden, it was just this plot device. And I feel like that's one of the things that really hurts the movie, is that there's things that really work naturally in story, and then there's things that are such blatant plot devices just to make certain things happen.
Yeah, they tried to focus on it a little. I remember early on when Beaver was at the bar, he managed to take a shot with the toothpick still in his mouth. And that was a shot that stood out to me, both, cinematography wise and the actual shot itself that he was drinking. But you never really understand where that's coming from. At first you think, okay, he's a guy at a bar chewing on a toothpick. Don't they?
Yeah.
That seems fairly normal.
I do that. Like it's
And then it's like he's addicted to them all of a sudden, and you're like, okay, it's obvious it's a coping mechanism for him.
But why?
Exactly.
And that's the thing. I feel like both of us were captivated by the story of them as kids. And I feel like we felt that way about the book too. And then you give us the stuff as adults, and I could be captivated by them as adults. And at certain points I am, because of the things that tie to those flashbacks. But I feel like I needed at least one or two more flashbacks just to give me background on what happened to these guys, what happened to them in Duddits. I wanted way more of that, and I definitely would have enjoyed the movie a lot more, if it flowed more with that stuff, instead of just jumping around whenever it wanted to for, Morgan Freeman playing cowboys and aliens. But I agree, it is not the worst Stephen King adaptation I've seen, and it wasn't as bad of a movie as I was expecting it to be, because I didn't really remember it, and I definitely feel like over the years the hatred of the movie that I've heard has certainly and its, you know, its reputation of the literally how did this get made, you know, of it. And I feel like that made my memory of the movie a lot worse. So then when I watched it, I was like, oh, there's certainly things that I don't like about this. There's certainly things that are cheesy and don't work and ridiculous. But I do think I think there was at one point about halfway through when I looked at how much was left, and I was like, oh, there's still an hour left.
Yeah. It was long too. It was like almost 2 hours and 15 minutes or something, I think.
Yeah. But but at the same time, it's like when I felt that, then it felt like it went quicker. Like I didn't feel like I was sitting there watching like a 4-hour movie. So it's like I noticed the length, I noticed the drag of it, but not enough for me to just be like, I hate everything about this. I definitely got angrier at the book than I did the movie.
Yeah, I think the book was a little harder to follow along with too, just because it seemed like you had a lot more back and forth in that. And then you had some other characters that I think didn't really play as big of a role in this. Like, we see Duddit's mom for what, like 30 seconds?
Yeah. Yeah. And she has this line of like, just, do you know why I'm letting you go with him? I'm like, no, I don't, because the movie hasn't told me.
You need to tell me because the movie hasn't, basically. But, you know, I don't think I have too much left to say about this. Like you said, wasn't as bad as I was expecting, and it looked good. It's one that has aged fairly well.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, even among some questionable CGI stuff, I was very, very impressed with I guess I'll call them what Stephen King calls them, the shit weasels. I was very impressed by the shit weasels. There's your tagline for your podcast.
It reminded me a little bit of the movie Slither.
Yeah, like I thought that when I saw that, I was shocked because I know how old this movie is, and then especially when it morphs into the alien, I was like, oh, that the shit weasels do really look good. So it's like that. There's a lot of stuff about it. I agree that aged well, and you know it looks good. You know the performances are as good as they can be with the material that they have. I don't know. Long live Pennywise.
I will say the touch of having Duddits in a yellow rain jacket was funny too.
That was nice.
Yeah. So, Tim, thank you so much for filling in on this episode. I know you weren't originally signed up for it, but the person who was like, so my wife is in the hospital having a baby. And I was like, oh, okay, that, you know, you take care of that. That's way more important than watching Dreamcatcher.
What are you talking about? There's nothing more important than watching Dreamcatcher. No,
nothing at all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm always happy to jump in. Congratulations to the would-be guest on the podcast.
Yes, Andy Maroon, if you're listening, congratulations. Yes. And you're probably glad you didn't have to rewatch this movie after all.
Absolutely.
All right, that does it for this episode of Chat Sematary. You can support the podcast on Patreon for $1 a month. You'll get a thank you on the show. For $2 a month, I will send you a Chat Sematary sticker. And if you want to follow us on social media, you can do so at Chat Sematary on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You could also rate and review the show. That's a huge help. And as always, thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.